Hello, everyone. I guess I'm live. I'm Anastasia Sharova, the founder of Happy Belly Fish, and I'd love to welcome you to our episode number 6 of our new live video podcast, Healthy Eating Unbiased and Simplified. In this interview series, we're talking with nutritionists, dietitians, doctors, food scientists, and even farmers about all things food and all things healthy eating. We are trying to bring you different perspectives about what healthy eating is. And, trying to do that, we are also bringing people from different countries and different backgrounds, because it will always influence where you're from and what's your background of how you see food and how, with what concept of healthy eating you grew up. If you're listening to me right now, if you're seeing me now, I see already there are some viewers and likers. Please say hi, wave at me, and say where you're from, say where you're watching us from, or maybe where you're originally from, and join us for this exciting conversation today. Today's topic is very personal for me, actually, and this is exactly what I just told to our guest before going live. I have a very strong personal connection. We are going to talk about nutrition and cultural diversity. Some of you know that I personally live between 3 countries. I live between Russia, Germany, and India. And I lived in some other countries too. And over the years, I've been watching how the diets have been changing in these countries. And they've been becoming very similar. It must be really surprising because, come on, Russia, Germany, and India, they can't be further from each other. So what was going on? Why people had started having the same concepts of what they should eat. They started buying the same brands, and they started eating the same things, which probably don't even grow in their countries. So that's why I was so excited when I came across the article by Tamara Melton. So Tamara knows, like no one else, how important the cultural diversity in the profession of nutrition is. So if you're watching me, say hello, because I'm going to invite Tamara to our screens now and start talking about our delicious cultures. Hello, Tamara.
Hi.
Can you hear us? Can you see me?
I can hear you and see you just fine.
Perfectly. The technical check is done. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I know we have a bit of a time difference. I mean, not a bit. What time is it over there right now?
It's 2:05 in the afternoon. So, yeah, it's kind of middle of the day.
Okay. So just after the lunchtime, right?
Yes.
Well, it's a podcast about food, we have to start talking about food too.
Right.
So Tamara, you have such an interesting background, and I found it actually even more fascinating because you're the professional who looks at nutrition and food through numbers, if I'm correct, right?
Yes, I do. Professionally, I work a little bit more in technology now. So my actual practice of area of dietetics is looking at nutrition and technology and data. Yes, not numbers.
And at the same time, you're so connected to the topic of cultural, racial, and ethnical diversity in nutrition. So how did it come about? How did you actually come to working with this?
So it's something, and you mentioned the article that I wrote for Self Magazine. That article for me, it was interesting when I was writing it. It was so easy to write because it's something I've always thought about because of my father. So my father is from Trinidad, and growing up, when he came to the States, and he moved to New York City, which is very diverse, and then moved around the country a bit. But then he spent some time in Europe because he was in the U.S. military and was just exposed to different regions. For us as his children, he always stressed upon us to be very curious about other cultures and the food that they eat and just everything about other cultures. And so it was just so natural to me to do that, to be very curious about everything related to cultures, but especially about food. So as I went into dietetics and I got interested in practicing in nutrition, and I would go into my classes in college and see the way that healthy food was presented, it would be this very narrow lens of healthy foods. And if we ever talked about anything that was outside of kind of this very one noted, I felt like, view of food, it was a very short conversation, and it kind of lumped all different groups of people. If they were of the same ethnicity, they all ate the same thing. And that's kind of what we were taught. And so to me, it just kind of bothered me, especially the more further I got into practicing that we were not breaking up and being very focused, especially as to be the healthcare, the experts who are working in nutrition. We weren't spending a lot of time really, one, honoring people's their cultures and the way that they were eating, because food is such a huge part of their culture. But then also we weren't being trained as nutritionists to be able to learn about our patients and our clients and their cultures and what they eat. So it definitely stemmed from my growing up. And that's why writing that article was the simplest thing ever to me. I just wrote what was in my head and what I've been thinking about for years. It was just really nice to see all the feedback that I got from around the world, especially like, here I'm talking to you, but definitely from around the world, hearing from people has been interesting.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting aspect because, I mean, you're from the US, and we know that there are people from different countries who've been growing there in generations already. But the thing why I find this cultural diversity aspect is so important today in today's world is because, for example, a lot of information that we consume, that we read about food is actually translated from English and is coming from the US. There are a lot of books, that are being translated. So the impact of a certain food doctrine is actually much bigger in a global context than anyone can imagine. So when was the first time, is it something quite new in the nutrition profession that people started talking about cultural diversity, or when was the first time that you actually realized, maybe during your first professional days, that also professionally it's a big thing, it has to be paid attention to?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think because it was something that was natural to me, for me to think about, I didn't realize how few of my colleagues were not thinking about it. So when I first started practicing as a dietitian, so first years out of school when I graduated, so I live in the South of the United States. And if you know about the history of the United States, the South is a very high concentration of people who are African descent, so brought over as slaves. So very much of a concentration there in the United States. And there's a whole cuisine called soul food that's down in this area of the United States. And so it's mainly Black people. So I would go into I was working at a senior center. And so I came into the senior center talking about nutrition, and the seniors were very happy to see me. One, I looked like them, but then two, I wasn't trying to change the way that they ate. A lot of soul food as a cuisine has a lot of, it's actually very vegetable based. If you think about it, what people could have access to, what they could grow in their own gardens, but then it does incorporate quite a bit of maybe pork or something like that, because they might have a hog that the family had. Because I always came from the perspective of trying to meet people where they were, and I so firmly believe that food is part of their culture, I wouldn't change what they were eating. And so that was the first foray where, when I was working with the actual clients, the seniors, they said, "Oh, you're going to change the way that we're eating." And I said, "No, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about the things that you already eat that are healthy, build upon that, and then maybe adjust, the portions. And then we're going to look at your whole lifestyle, your physical activity levels, stress levels, and things like that really affect your overall health." And for them, looking at me, they'd had dietitians in the past come to them, but this is the first time that anybody had ever said that to them. So I think that was my first aha moment of, people are not being presented from the healthcare perspective, from professionals, that they can continue to eat the way that they've been eating, so they don't have to give up their culture, and then they can work from there. And then the more I got into it, I would observe, like you mentioned, educational materials that were being created, how people would kind of, and by people I mean other nutritionists, would kind of lump together all Asians all of a sudden ate rice. It was like they did that. And then if you spoke Spanish, you must eat tortillas, because that's what it was. And so that's when I started to say, okay, you know, one, we need in our profession here in the States and around the world, I think for any nutritionist it's still very white. It's just not as diverse anyways. And that's for a whole nother topic. But I think that has kind of trickled down into really even just any sort of type of eating pattern. And it's funny because as you mentioned in America, so in the States, even if somebody immigrated from Europe, they came from a European country, it's as if there's no culture with white people. It's interesting. We talk about that a little bit in the States. They're like, they don't have, and we'll tell them, you do have a culture, like you came from somewhere. There is a culture, but it's kind of homogenized and put into this American fashion. And so when you work with people, and there are people, you know, with the world being so much more global and everything so interconnected, when you work with them, I just saw that there weren't enough educational materials. There wasn't enough being taught in our training to explain to us how to be more curious about people and their cultures and the way that they eat. We weren't ever really taught that much across the board to go to local grocery stores or shops or things like that. So that's when I first saw it. It was right away out of school. And I've just seen over the last decade as I've practiced, it really hasn't changed. I mean, that method of teaching of nutritionists coming up from this one very Eurocentric lens has not changed very much.
That's very interesting that you mentioned that, you know, there is a very particular type of teaching and of a person, let's call it a persona, right, who is treating the patient and who's kind of saying what was the correct way of eating. And when I was preparing for this interview, I just was looking for some research which was already done on this topic. I was really surprised how much is out there and that there is quite a lot of evidence that, yes, it should become a part of the debate. It should become a part of the education in nutrition. And I think it was a survey conducted in 2017, and where it was saying that something like around 15% of nutritionists identify them as non-white Americans.
Yeah.
And then they, you know, kind of identify them from influence from a different culture.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely, and it trickles down. Whoever is preparing your materials is going to trickle down into what is presented to audiences. And here in the States, it's we will be majority by 2025. And I've said that at some talks and things like that. And people are like, oh, that's a cute statistic. I'm like, but it's data. I'm like, it's facts. Like, it's not a statistic that I'm kind of making up. It's facts that are happening. And so because of that shift, if we want to be able to continue to offer the best healthcare to people, you know, they're remembering what they're eating from. Food in even out of the context of talking about cultural diversity, just trying to get people to change the way they eat is very, very difficult. That's just, it doesn't matter where they're from or anything like that. It's much, much easier to work with what they're familiar with and what probably they know how to cook, what they can have access to. And then I always tell my colleagues in nutrition, we are the ones who are trained in the science. We can break a food down to its chemical level. It doesn't matter what food it is. And it's our job to look at a client and a patient and what they're currently eating, break it down, and then figure out how to work within what they are already eating, because that's where our training comes from. And that's what we can do. And I think that if we can get more diversity within our actual profession in all areas of food, in agriculture, in culinary arts, in food production, in every piece of it, and nutrition, if we just have more diversity of different groups working together, then I think we can meet more people where they are. And then that's eventually going to affect their health, their outcomes. And it helps them feel more comfortable. And it also helps them feel like I can do it. You want everybody to feel like, oh, this is attainable. I can actually achieve this. It's comfortable. I'm not asking you to go out and learn a whole new, somebody doesn't cook with quinoa, or if they don't eat kale, or if they, it's just not, just because it's trendy doesn't mean they may not even be able to access it. If they have to go to their local grocery store that they can walk to or take a bus to, and if those foods aren't there, or if they are there and they're expensive, it's not attainable for them. It makes it seem like one of the things I talked about in the topic is that it makes it seem like wellness is only available for the richest people, the wealthiest people, the people who have the most access in society. But that's not true. It's accessible to everyone. And so I think that it's important to remember that when we're presenting things to people, that we want to make sure that's accessible and we honor their own, their cultures. Sometimes it goes to religion. We honor all of that because we need to honor that for people. And then they can start to be healthy within their own, kind of their own parameters, what they're comfortable with.
Kale in English. And it's not very easy to find sometimes, and it actually has a completely different name in German, and people don't even know what the locals. And I also hear an argument very often, okay, quinoa is 2.5 times more expensive than, I don't know, the local rye flour for bread, and I can't afford it. It's too expensive to eat well. I can't do that. I can't eat so many plants because they're so expensive. And then you start asking what people are searching for. And these are foods that are traveling from miles and miles and thousands of miles. And of course, the price is obvious. And it's a little bit sad because I just wonder if, as a kind of byproduct, this food promoting this product with this way of eating, if it brings other foods to extinction from our culture.
I think that it does. I mean, I think I watched, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a new Netflix series called Salt, Fat, Acid, and Heat. Oh, yeah. And you've seen it. And I, of course, it was right up my alley. She's going, Samin is a chef, and she's going around the world and watching what people are eating. She's talking about the different salt, fat, acid, and heat. She's talking about those in the construct of what they're eating in their cultures. And I remember sitting there watching it thinking, okay, I've eaten what I thought was Japanese food, or I've eaten what I thought was Italian food, but so many of the things that they're talking about, I remember she was in Mexico and they were eating all these sour oranges. I'm like, I never even knew that was part of Mexican cuisine. We're bordering it, on this country here, and we're so close to it. But because if you start to have people who are eating, this one type of food, other types of foods are going to go away. Like you said, nobody's cultivating it. Mm-hmm. People don't know how to prepare it. Nobody's passing it down to their children. She was there in Japan, and there was a gentleman there who makes soy sauce the old-fashioned way. So I was talking about, you'd made the comment, which is so true, about if people are not eating certain types of foods because they're trying to eat this healthy way, and so they let the foods that part of their cultures, their parents, their grandparents ate. But I was thinking about, there's plants, but it also could happen from some types of animals. It's funny, in the United States, lean meats became very popular. And so pig farmers started to breed leaner pigs. But now you're seeing this change back to heritage pigs, which actually have more fat in them, because back years ago, fat was very lard. You needed lard to get through the wintertime to be able to cook. And so you just see how the market, food manufacturers and agriculture are going to react to what consumers want. And so if the messaging from health professionals is eat kale, have quinoa, lean meats, then manufacturers are going to start to produce foods that way. And you're going to start to see other foods, it could be plant, animal, whatever. You're going to start to see those types of foods become less available, which isn't necessarily a good thing, I don't think. It has less variety. And we're all eating this, like you mentioned, for you to be traveling around in Europe in 3 very different countries and to see us all eating the same way is very interesting because there should be so much variety there, so much diversity. It's interesting to see. I am glad to see, though, now that more people are interested in food and cooking. When people get curious about their food and get curious about cooking, and then if you can add that into get curious about your family and your heritage and people around you and their family and heritage, and getting to know your friends and your neighbors and what they eat, then I think we start to save different strains of grains and things like that, and then become more available and things like that if they start to get more curious about the foods that they're actually eating.
Yeah, you know, I always believe that if you observe the cuisines that are the richest and have the most flavors in the world, these are what the cuisines that absorbed a lot of ideas from other countries, at least until a certain point, you know, who were very accepting to other crops, maybe spices or the ways of cooking. And the result is that the diet is now much more diverse than when you look at the countries with more conservative approach, you know, when they would stick only to certain types of foods, kind of identifying themselves with their own identity, you know, less than these flavors or their nutritional side. Their food is boring.
Yes, that's so true. So I think, so, you know, my father being from Trinidad, very, very diverse country, because there were Africans there, a lot of people from India. And so, and a lot of other places too, Europe and things like that. And so the food that's there, you'll see a lot of the foods are Indian foods. So East Indians foods, Asian Indian food, a lot of curries and things like that. But then you see a lot of the foods that you can trace back to African food nations and then European, but you're right. But I even think about like Vietnamese have a lot of French influence because France was there and they occupied for a while. And so I think that's so true that when those have more spices and flavor, then it's very homogenous, like you said, boring. It's just bland. It's just the way that it is. It's just bland. So true.
Yeah, I think Trinidad is really one of the best examples culturally, how much it absorbed from everywhere. And I mean, I haven't tried a lot of your food, but yes, some of it. And I know that there is a big Indian influence and I mean, half of my family is Indian, so for me, it's also very special cuisine. And but you know, coming back to what we're talking about, for example, yes, I'll give as an example Indian cuisine too. On Happy Bellyfish, we have a school where we teach different programs to cook a healthy way. We have the online cooking classes, and recently, in a few weeks, recently, I had several students from India who were writing me and asking things like, well, you know, we read this and that about the berries, and we want to prepare using this technique, but berries like here are unavailable, they don't grow, and we want to buy them. Well, they're frozen, they're preserved maybe in a certain way, but is there anything else that we can use? And I found it really sad because India is a country, I mean, it's a land of plenty. There is a lot of abundance of fantastic fruits, but because the sources that they read about the recipes and what's good, you know, what has a lot of antioxidants, for example, they see berries, the berries which grow in cold forests of, let's say, Russia, you know, when it's plus 5 degrees and raining, and it's just not happening there. But they don't explore what's around them. I mean, I don't blame them. It's just not the information that's easily available. And slowly, you know, the frozen berries will start replacing other sources of the same antioxidants.
Exactly. Yeah. There's the cool thing about food and science and food science is that in every culture, you can find very similar chemical structures, like you just said, antioxidants. So you're going to find a fruit or a vegetable with similar antioxidants. And a lot of times, my favorite one as an example is beta carotene. The way we see it is through the color orange. So sweet potatoes and cantaloupes and salmon all have the similar color, but it's all from beta carotene. But think about all the different cultures that kind of spans. You're not, you know, sweet potatoes we will find in some areas of the world that salmon is not in, but it still has the same nutrient in it. And we're able to find, there's such a variety of foods, and it's less expensive and it's more accessible. And that's a kind of the difficulty with the good thing and bad thing about globalization is that people have access to media and they're being presented with views of what wellness and health is. And instead of looking in their own backyard, they're trying to find something that needs to be imported in or shipped over. Like you said, if it's coming from Russia to India, but they might have something right there. And the interesting thing is one thing that I noticed, kind of back to your question you asked me about with when I first noticed this, when I was in school, we were talking about lactose intolerance. It was just one sentence. And I mentioned this in the article. And they said in there that people of African descent tend to have higher lactose intolerance. And you'll see this in other groups too. Asians, things like that. And that's it, but it just stopped there. And I remember sitting there looking at the textbook thinking, are we going to talk more about this? And so I myself was curious. And so I went back and kind of traced it and I said, oh, well, logically, if you look at these different groups, they're not drinking cow's milk. Well, they probably don't have the enzyme to be able to, digest cow's milk as much as another culture where they have been drinking cow's milk for so many years. And so they just genetically have that. But we don't even talk about that much when we talk about nutrition. We don't talk about that. We just talk about, here it is, that one sentence. And so that's why I also like to tell people it's great to explore other foods. That's wonderful. But eating something that's closer to your culture might actually make you feel better. Your body might be more primed for that genetically. That might be something that makes you feel better just because of what your genes are able to process.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I wonder if there is actually a large body of research talking about this heritage when it comes to food.
I haven't seen that much. I remember looking because I was so curious then in school and looking for it. It's not one of those areas that is explored as much and looking at it. And you would think that it would, but I think that instead of looking at, so let's take the example of lactose intolerance again, here in the States, instead of saying, okay, there's a group of people who, a large group, two large groups actually, if I'm thinking about Asians and African descent. So you have two very large groups who are not tolerating lactose very well. Maybe we should suggest other high calcium foods. Instead, let's produce a product that mimics cow's milk but doesn't have as much lactose. So that's what it turns into, is instead of let's actually look at another food that they could eat to get those same nutrients, we're going to go out and make this lactose low or lactose free milk that they can drink, or give them lactose pills. So I think more money has been put into that than into the research of what would different, kind of getting into the cultures and saying, what would this group be better eating, and what would they tolerate better, or this group or this group. It's definitely gone in a different direction.
This is a genuinely very interesting topic about this fake foods that, as you said, lactose-free milk, gluten-free flour, which will have gluten normally, and vegan meat, and there are a lot of substitutes which. And it's interesting because usually these substitutes, as you said, they mimic probably the texture and the flavor, but they absolutely not replace usually the chemical side of it, right? Like the nutritional side of it.
And there are so many nutrients that we see them, and we don't know everything about nutrition science. And my caution, I always tell people when they go and they find, let's say, for instance, if you don't want to eat animal products, okay, so that's fine. But if you eat some sort of like you said, like a fake meat product, as opposed to eating beans or legumes. There are things in those beans and legumes that we don't even know how they work, I guarantee you, because nutrition is still a young science. And when you go and you use a different product that is created by man and manufactured, I guarantee you there are some nutrients in those other foods that we don't even know that you're missing that actually would make your body, benefit your body and your health.
So that brings me to another question about all these types of popular diets that you now find all over internet, of course. I mean, now it's keto, paleo, and vegan, and I'm sure there will be another one very soon. I mean, every few years there is some big trend coming up, and it has always a lot of scientific confirmation that it works, and a lot of personal examples. But does any of these diets actually ever take the cultural side of it or heritage side of it? And can it be, in a way, even dangerous that people blindly would follow certain diets without thinking where they're from, actually?
Yeah, so I'll take the first part of your question, that it doesn't, definitely doesn't take into account somebody's culture. Somebody had said this, I think a colleague of mine recently who posted on her Instagram account about the keto diet, which is extremely popular right now, and how it is, there's so many cultures that just the foods that are even allowed on the keto diet just wouldn't even fit in with what they can access, what makes sense for their culture. whenever they would get to any celebrations or holidays or anything, nobody could stay on the keto diet. So that's one thing. They're not very inclusive of diversity. The other part for anybody is that they are they're difficult to maintain. I mean, a keto diet or paleo or things like that, when you eliminate whole food groups, when you eliminate whole nutrient profiles, that's not the way our bodies work, and our body needs those nutrients. And like I said, nutrition is a young science. And so when you eliminate a lot of different nutrients, you don't know what you're doing. Many people aren't able to even maintain those diets to the point to where they would get to the point to where they are harming themselves. Some people can if they're very, very disciplined, and especially if they start to lose weight, which tends to be what they're trying to do, then they'll stick to it. But still few people can. The few people who are could affect themselves. Maybe if they're having a high protein diet and there's somebody who needs to have, who needs to watch out for their kidneys, that they're not taking in too much protein or things like that, that could affect them. But for most people, what happens is they lose a little bit of weight. And I said little bit because they regain it plus more because once they go back to eating it as they normally would, that's what happens a lot of times. Your body brings back the water in with, and then the fat comes back, and that's what happens. But they definitely are not anything that is very inclusive of different cultures. And that goes back to my comment of it presents wellness in this it's for the few. It presents wellness and health as only for a few people. But if you really think about what we call healthy eating, it's plant-based. It's a lot of different colors in your diet. It's eating locally, right? So we talk about eating locally. And it's also using small amounts of animal meat. And it's a lot of physical activity. Well, think about people who are poor. They probably have a garden. They can't afford that much animal protein. They're not having that much. And they probably walk a lot. So it's like they actually have it, the healthiest thing right there, if that's what they focus on. I know some people, if they if money is an issue, they might eat more processed foods. But many people, if you really look at cultures, they're very plant-based. It's already there. They're already doing what seems like we're going all around the world to come right back to where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now there are so many popular books talking about kind of simple living and traditional living, and it's exactly what you just mentioned. I wish I could just print out, and put it on a wall of each school. Actually, I think this is what kids should learn and what we should learn at the very early stages of life. Without going and ruining our health, and then to come back to some simple truths. But they sound simple, but they somehow so difficult to implement, right? Because we have so many habits by that time that we realize it. Which are almost impossible to get rid of. So guys, if you're watching us now, because the time is ticking and eventually I'll have to let Tamara go back to her work. If you have any questions, please ask them, write them in the comments. If you're watching a replay, I know a lot of you will be watching it after being live. Please start your comments with replay and we will make sure that Tamara answers them. And please join our discussion, even if the live broadcasting is already over. We love to have a conversation with you. But, so Tamara, we've been talking a lot about the foods, like particular foods and aspects, and you really gave me a lot of food for thought, and I would love to see more of this aspect of actually studying of which groups, like your example was lactose, like how the bodies of people of certain heritage react to certain foods, and how the diets can serve them better, and not necessarily the prescriptions, but the general guidelines and recommendations, also that people don't get lost and that they really can implement in their everyday lives and give respect to their background. But you also have it as a mission in your life, basically, to through your nonprofit organization, to increase diversity among professionals in nutrition. So can you tell us a little more about what exactly you do and how the Diversify Dietetics works, and what are your projects?
Yes, so we have in the United States and in some European countries, Australia probably being the biggest one, to become a dietitian, to be able to practice as a healthcare professional, there is a pretty long educational pathway, and it's very structured. Here specifically in the United States, because of that and some other factors, there are not that many people of color in our profession. And I always explain to people, I don't just mean African Americans, I mean people of color. What that happens for our profession is that we work with everyone, right? So any client or patient who might come, I always tell when I teach students and I tell them, everybody eats. They're either eating through their mouth or eating through a tube or eating through their vein. There's some way that they're eating. There's some if they're alive and on the planet, this is what they're doing. And so we potentially could be working with everybody in the world. And so dietitians work all over the place. So I just have been teaching in some capacity in academia for the last decade. And I was not seeing any change in the demographics of the students who are coming into our programs. And I had the opportunity to chair a health informatics, health IT program. So a little bit out of the nutrition discipline, but still in the nutrition world. And I went to my superiors at the university where I was teaching and asked, could I take any student that I wanted, no matter, as long as they were in the university, could I accept them into my program, and allowed me to have more flexibility with what their academic level was at, their what we call their grade point average or their marks that we have. Could I take somebody who on paper wouldn't necessarily fit that mold of what a typical nutrition student or even healthcare student would look like? And they said yes, and so I did. And so I ended up having very diverse classes of students who were graduating and doing very well. Now, this is in a different discipline, is in health IT, but it has a lot of rigor to it. It's a very challenging field to be in, especially right now. It's such a new field. And so I looked at it and thought, why isn't this something that we can do in nutrition? Why isn't it something that we can practice there? And so that is what we wanted to start. My co-founder and I, Deanna Bellany is her name, is to look and create resources for students and to say to them, here are what you need to get through the educational pathway, so that we can have more people, more diversity in our profession, so that we can create more resources for the clients and patients that we work with. And I've talked to so many students over the last few months since we've launched, who are from all over the world, and they'll describe what they're cooking and what they're eating. And I'll tell them, this is why we need you, because what you're saying, I talked to a student, we had a large conference a couple of weeks ago, and the student was Chinese. And she said, she is Chinese. And she said that she's still a student, so she was volunteering somewhere. And a Chinese man came in and he was so excited to talk to her. And I said, yes, because he knows that you understand what he eats. And even if she said, I don't even speak that much Chinese. And I said, he didn't care as long as he saw somebody who knew what he was eating and understood what he was eating. It helps for people when they're in healthcare, they don't have to explain as much. And then I told her, I said, what if I was working with you as a colleague? You could teach me things that I wouldn't know, and I could come to you and consult with you. So if we had more diversity in our profession, we'd just have more of those opportunities. So that's our goal. We work with students and we work with educators. And then we also work with professionals kind of in this kind of capacity, talking about why is it so important. It helps for people to see the connection for all the people that we work with. This is why we need more of a profession that's more diverse. So that's what all of our programming is around. Very, very student focused, but also working in some areas where we look at cultural diversity. So we're excited to, if you follow us on Instagram and see it, you see all the students who are from all over the world, and I love it. And they post things, and they'll post the foods that they're eating, and we share them. And so that's great. And so that's what our organization is about. We're hoping to increase diversity in our profession so that we can better serve our clients and patients.
Well, thank you for the work you do. It's also in the conversation today, I'm realizing how important it is and how much impact, as I also mentioned earlier, the nutrition professionals have on everything, actually our economy as well. Like it's nobody realizes it, but yes, these things are very much interconnected, and also the trends that we follow, and that probably if we have professionals, more diversity among them, then they will also can bring different perspectives and bring more respect to what's already existing in other cultures, and
Exactly.
make sure that good things don't disappear. Do you also work with gender, because it was very interesting in the same study where I was reading about the ethnic diversity. It was written that 94% are actually women. Yeah, it's probably one of the very few areas.
There are very few men, and it's interesting. Yeah, so we our focus is racial and ethnic, but because of that, it's so interesting to see. We've seen a lot of men who are interested in coming and practicing in dietetics. I think that it's funny if you get out of the majority culture and look at minority cultures. A lot of men do a lot more cooking. And so that's where we're actually seeing more men, because the traditional role is that men might do more cooking or farming or something like that. And so the men in those, as we kind of include that group, we have more men there. So we've actually engaged with quite a few students who are men who are interested in coming into the profession. We just did a whole, in the month of August, we do a series where we spotlight nutrition professionals. So August was our Men of Color, our Men of Color month. So we just focused on men who are working in dietetics. And that's important too, to have men, because in diversity, it's not just like you said, gender is important, because women, we're not gonna be able to speak to men, necessarily about the things that might be important to them. It might be sports related or something related to just the way that they eat and their own health issues or things like that. And so we have been able to engage some more men. And I love doing that series. We'll do it again and that's important, because we don't want men who look at the profession to think, oh, that's all women over there. It's like a women's profession, which it is right now. It's just mainly women, 94%, like you said. So we want them to have some examples of other men that they can connect with, so that they can have some role models to look up to, see some career pathways, if they have any questions or things like that. So if you go on our Instagram, you'll see some of our guys, as I call them, who are students and otherwise who are engaged with us.
Well, we will definitely, after we finish our conversation today, we will leave all the links to your organization and to your Instagram profile. And I hope, guys, it will inspire you. And yes, Tamara, I have, because we also have students who are both male and female, and I had the feeling sometimes that men, they have the same problems. I mean, we are all humans, and but they might be a little shy sometimes to talk about them to a woman, and it's the same that comes to the cultural background, right? Whatever you say, in reality, people are more comfortable with someone who is like they are. I mean, it's a culture, color, gender, many factors. They just feel more comfortable, they feel more understood. So actually, the more diverse the nutrition professionals are, the better health outcomes will be there, I guess, because people will be more open and will be trusting more to the person they're speaking with.
Exactly, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So guys, we are coming to the end of our discussion now, and you still have one last chance to ask your questions. If you don't do it now, you can do it on replay. Just put your comments starting with the replay. And I hope that today's conversation gave you as much food for thought as it gave me. And if I may, I'd love to give you a little task. Please think about your own background and think about the foods in your family and what you learned from your mother or maybe grandmother or even grandmother if you're lucky enough, about what healthy foods were in your culture and in your family, and share with us if you have them in your everyday life now and how you cook it. Because we all love delicious food, especially that makes us healthier. Tamara, I'm going to thank a huge thank you. I love your approach. I love your professionalism, and I really wish all the best for your organization. I can imagine it growing very strong and successful, and see how it's making people healthier, happier, and our plates more delicious.
Thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tamara. Okay, guys, I'm going to say bye. Leave your comments and don't forget about the task. I'll be very looking forward to reading about it. Bye-bye. Have a great evening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Now, head over to happybellyfish.com and check out some amazing online programs and cooking classes that we are offering together with food experts from all around the world. Eat healthy, keep your belly and taste buds happy.